Move it or roll out of my courtroom, boy. The judge didn't even look at the man, he just barked at. The courtroom froze. Every eye turned to the frail figure in the wheelchair, not because of the insult, but because of what hung silently around his neck, the silver star. Carlton Mays had been invisible for years, not because he lacked presence, but because America had a way of forgetting its black heroes once the medals stopped shining. He didn't come to this courthouse to be honored. He came to mop the marble floors after hours, cleaning the very chambers where justice was supposed to reign. But today was different. Today he came in the morning not to work, but to testify. Judge Reginald C. Halberd was known around Jefferson County for three things: his ruthless rulings, his fondness for cigars, and his barely concealed disdain for lazy folk. Most never said it out loud, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. When Carlton rolled through the courtroom doors at 8:15 a.m., he did so dressed in clean but faded overalls, with his Veterans Affairs ID badge clipped proudly to his shirt pocket. His wheelchair whined slightly, one of the front casters bent from years of unpaid repairs. "Is this the witness?" The judge had scoffed, waving one hand in lazy disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me. What's he going to do? Tell us how to sweep the truth under the rug?" The public defender stood frozen, jaw tight, while the young defendant, a teenage Latino boy named Luis Santiago, shrank in his chair. Carlton didn't flinch. He just pushed forward slowly, parked his chair by the witness box, and nodded once. "You'll show this court your credentials?" Halbert said mockingly. Carlton reached inside his jacket. But it wasn't a document he pulled out. It was a laminated newspaper clipping from 1968. Private First Class Carlton Mays saves 12 men in ambush platoon awarded Silver Star. Beneath the headline was a black and white photo of a young, sharp-eyed soldier in jungle fatigues, rifle in hand, teeth gritted. The courtroom went silent. Even the bailiff stopped fidgeting with his belt. Judge Halbert blinked. "Is that supposed to mean something to me?" Carlton smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile you gave a man who hadn't seen the truth in decades. "No, sir," Carlton said quietly. "But it sure as hell should." He turned to the jury, not needing notes, not needing prompts. His voice was slow but deliberate. 57 years ago, I crawled through jungle mud with half my thigh blown off to drag Sergeant Monroe to safety. He was white. Didn't matter. Didn't ask. He was my brother in that war. You think color matters when the bullets are flying? It don't. But I came back home, and suddenly color was everything. I couldn't sit at diners. Couldn't vote. And now, you look at me and still see a mop, not a man. Luis Santiago was accused of stealing a judge's briefcase, the very same Judge Halbert, from a bench outside the courthouse. Carlton had seen the whole thing. The boy had picked it up when a group of lawyers walked away, thinking it was trash. He tried to return it minutes later, but was arrested before he could explain. Carlton was sweeping near the door when it happened. He saw it all. I saw that kid stop, look at the case, then run after the man who dropped it. I also saw 2 deputies tackle him before he could say a damn word. You're not trying to find justice. You're trying to teach a lesson that brown boys don't get the benefit of the doubt. Judge Halbert's face flushed deep red. "That's enough." "No, Your Honor," Carlton said, his voice rising like a wave. "It's not nearly enough." The gallery erupted into whispers. The prosecutor looked like he wanted to disappear. Carlton turned back to the jury. "Every generation says racism is over. Every courtroom says justice is blind. But I've been invisible in this town for 50 years, not because I did wrong, but because folks like you decided my story wasn't worth hearing." Judge Halbert slammed the gavel. "This is my courtroom." Carlton looked him in the eye. "Not today, sir. Today it's mine." What followed was a silence, so thick it seemed to blanket the whole building. The jury didn't even take an hour to deliberate. Luis was acquitted unanimously. The judge didn't speak another word for the rest of the day. That afternoon, someone placed a copy of the newspaper clipping the same one Carlton had brought on the courthouse bulletin board. By the next morning, flowers had been left at his janitor's closet. A local veterans group offered to fix his wheelchair for free. And for the first time in years, when he rolled down Main Street, people looked at Carlton Mays and saw him. But Carlton didn't need the recognition. He didn't do it for the applause. He did it because the boy deserved a future. Because dignity wasn't something you earned in war. It was something you never stopped fighting for, even after the battles were over. And because sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is just show up and tell the truth. The next morning, Carlton Mays arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. Not because he had a clean was off duty that day, but because something inside him wouldn't let him sleep. He'd spent most of the night replaying the events in his head, half wondering if he'd done the right thing. But when he passed the courthouse steps and saw a group of veterans, black, white, Latino, standing silently in a line, saluting him as he rolled by, he knew. Justice might be slow, but truth had momentum. Inside the building, Judge Halbert's chambers remained locked. Rumors swirled. Some said he'd taken the day off. Others said he'd been called into an emergency meeting by the State Judicial Oversight Board. Carlton didn't care. He didn't want revenge. He wanted change. At noon, Carlton was asked to attend a private meeting in room 204 with several county officials, including Chief Judge Martha Reinhardt and District Attorney Peter Glenn. They didn't call it a hearing. They called it a review, but Carlton knew a court in disguise when he saw one. "You understand why we're here, Mr. Mays?" asked Reinhardt, her tone careful. Carlton nodded. "You're worried about optics, about headlines." "That's not fair," Glenn interjected. "We're trying to—" "No, let him speak," said Reinhardt. "Go on, Mr. Mays." Carlton's hands folded neatly on his lap. "You've had that man on the bench for 32 years. He's handed out more prison time than half your state combined. You want to talk about one outburst, but I want to talk about a pattern." The room stiffened. "You want to ask me if I plan to sue or speak to the press or protest out front? I don't. I'm tired. But if you think I'll let this town keep calling itself fair while it buries boys like Luis and men like me, you're wrong." D.A. Glenn looked down at his notes. "We've received several complaints about Judge Halberd over the years, but most were dismissed." "By whom?" Carlton asked. Reinhardt hesitated. "By internal review panels." "Panels made up of who?" Reinhardt sighed. "Judges." Carlton leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "You don't get to call it justice when the fox guards the hen house." Silence. Then, almost reluctantly, D.A. Glenn spoke. "There's precedent for removal, but it requires a formal investigation and public hearings." Carlton nodded. "Then start one, because I won't be the only one speaking this time." The door opened suddenly. Luis Santiago entered, flanked by his mother and a public defender. Reinhardt motioned for them to sit. "What is this?" Carlton asked. "Luis asked to speak with you," the public defender said. "Privately, if that's okay." The room emptied, leaving just Carlton and the boy. Luis sat quietly, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "Mr. Mays," he began, "I didn't know people like you existed." Carlton smiled. "That's because people like me were never meant to be seen." Luis swallowed hard. "I want to help, however I can. If you need someone to speak, I'll do it." Carlton shook his head. "You've already done enough, son. You survived. That's more than most." Luis reached into his backpack and pulled out a notebook, handing it over. "It's something I wrote, about the arrest, and about you." Carlton opened it, surprised by the boy's raw, honest handwriting. There were sketches of the courtroom, the gavel, the wheelchair, and one page with just 2 words written in bold pencil strokes. "Stand tall." Carlton closed the notebook gently. You got a voice, Luis. Never let anyone shame you into silence. The hearings began 2 weeks later. By then, the town was already buzzing. Local reporters caught wind of the story, then state news, then national. It wasn't just about a judge anymore. It was about power and perception and the uncomfortable truths hiding beneath polished court benches. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the public inquiry. Carlton wore a crisp white button-down, the same shirt he'd worn to his granddaughter's college graduation. His medals, polished now, rested inside a small display box beside his chair. He didn't need to wear them anymore. Their weight lived in his words. The first witness was a black female attorney, Sheila Harris, who testified about the subtle ways Judge Halbert had blocked her motions, cut short her cross-examinations, and called her young lady, even after she'd been practicing law for over a decade. Then came Javier Mendoza, a social worker who'd watched Halbert deny plea deals to first-time offenders of color, but routinely grant leniency to white kids from affluent families. Then came Carlton. When he rolled to the front of the courtroom, the crowd hushed. Even Halbert, seated at the far end of the chamber, looked up, his face pale but still defiant. Carlton spoke slowly, letting each word land. I gave my legs to this country. I gave my blood, my youth, my sleep. I've buried men who called me brother. I came back expecting little, just decency. But in this courthouse, I was nothing more than a boy, a janitor, a nuisance in a wheelchair. He looked directly at Halbert. You look through me, but the people in this room, they see me, and they see you. Halbert shifted, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not asking for your seat, Carlton continued. I'm asking for your conscience. But if you can't find it, then I'll ask this court to find it for you. The hearings continued for 5 days. On the 6th, the panel announced its recommendation: immediate suspension and formal censure. The Missouri Commission on Judicial Conduct began proceedings to strip Halbert of his robe permanently. When the news hit, the crowd outside the courthouse didn't cheer. They stood silently, watching as Halbert exited through the back, flanked by his lawyer. There was no redemption in his eyes, only resentment. But Carlton didn't watch him go. He was already on the front steps, talking to 3 young boys who had seen him on TV. Are you really a soldier? One asked. Carlton chuckled. Once. Did you kill anybody? Another whispered. Carlton paused. I saved more than I hurt. That's what matters. The third boy stared at his wheelchair. You gonna be okay? Carlton's eyes twinkled. I've always been okay. Took the world a while to notice. A month later, the Jefferson County Courthouse was renamed. It wasn't a grand ceremony, just a small plaque above the western entrance. The Carlton Mays Hall of Justice. Below that, in bronze lettering, truth is not heavy, but it takes strength to carry it. Luis was there. So was Sheila Harris. So were hundreds of others: janitors, lawyers, veterans, kids, all standing shoulder to shoulder. No barriers, no bench, just people. People who finally saw each other. Fall came early to Jefferson County that year. The courthouse trees turned to flames of amber and crimson, and the air held that crisp, watchful stillness that only followed great change. The plaque bearing Carlton May's name had now become a local landmark. Teachers brought their students to read the quote engraved beneath it. Veterans came to salute. Some even left letters not just of thanks, but of confession, regret, hope. Carlton read every one. One letter, written in careful cursive by an elderly woman named Etta Barnes, struck him deeply. It read, Mr. Mays, when my husband came home from Vietnam, he came home broken. You saved him in that jungle, and I've spent 50 years praying I'd get the chance to thank you. Your voice didn't just change a courtroom. It healed something in me, too. Carlton sat with that letter in his lap for hours, the late sun casting long shadows across the tiled floor of his apartment. He didn't cry. He rarely did. But he felt something shift. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. Still, the fight wasn't over. With Judge Halbert's seat now officially vacated, Governor Trenton announced a public nomination process. For the first time in Jefferson County history, anyone with the legal credentials and enough signatures could run. Carlton didn't plan to throw his name in. He'd done his part. But he had someone else in mind. Sheila Harris, the attorney who'd bravely testified about Halbert's discrimination, who had stood firm in the face of mockery and systemic obstruction. She had what the bench needed now: integrity, courage, and lived experience. Carlton invited her to lunch at the Veterans Hall downtown. "I appreciate the thought, Mr. Mays," she said cautiously, sipping iced tea. "But politics, that's a different battlefield." Carlton leaned in. "You've already been fighting it. Might as well take the hill." She looked down, her jaw tightening. "They'll dig up everything. My student loan defaults, the protest I got arrested at in '09, my mom's record." Carlton cut her off gently. "Then let them dig. Let them see what real justice looks like." Sheila stared at him, blinking away sudden emotion. "You'd endorse me publicly?" He nodded, loudly, and so it began. Sheila Harris announced her candidacy the following week, standing on the same courthouse steps where Carlton had once rolled into a hostile courtroom. But now it was different. The people who gathered weren't just black or brown. They were white, old, young, veterans, teachers, janitors, even retired cops. They weren't united by politics. They were united by what Carlton had reawakened: a hunger for decency. The campaign was uphill from the start. Her opponent was a slick-talking assistant DA named Bradley Kempt, who smiled like he practiced in mirrors and spoke in dog whistles. "I respect our janitors, our veterans," he said during one debate. "But let's not confuse emotion with qualifications." Sheila didn't flinch. Qualifications without compassion build prisons, not justice. Carlton watched from the front row, pride swelling in his chest. Louise sat beside him, now volunteering full-time with the campaign, managing Sheila's social media presence, and designing flyers with bold, beautiful headlines. "Your story deserves a bench, too." As Election Day neared, the air in town buzzed with energy. Early voting lines wrapped around blocks. Debates sparked at diners, in barber shops, in churches. And something remarkable happened. People began to talk differently. Old men who once crossed the street when a black man approached now asked questions. Teens who never thought about the justice system now canvassed neighborhoods. Veterans who hadn't spoken of the war in years came forward to tell stories of Carlton, of other forgotten heroes, of promises still unfulfilled. The night before the election, Carlton sat in the back of his old pickup, parked on a hill overlooking the town. Louise joined him, legs dangling off the edge of the tailgate. "You nervous?" the boy asked. Carlton chuckled. "Nah, nerves are for folks who got something to lose. I already won, kid." "So did you." Louise looked out over the town, its courthouse bathed in soft amber light. "I didn't think life could change this fast." "It doesn't," Carlton said. "It doesn't change fast. But every once in a while it tips." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of crickets rising around them. Then Carlton reached into his coat pocket and handed Louise something. His silver star. Louise's eyes widened. "I can't." "You're not keeping it," Carlton said. "You're borrowing it. One day, you'll pass it to someone else." Louise nodded slowly, understanding more than words could ever say. Election night came like thunder. The polls closed at 8 p.m. sharp. By 9:17, it was clear Sheila Harris had won, not by a landslide, but by enough. Enough to matter. Enough to prove the people had spoken. The celebration at the Veterans Hall was modest but electric. Sheila entered to applause, but her eyes went straight to Carlton. "I only made it here," she whispered, "because you wheeled through first." Carlton laughed. "Then don't slow down. That bench needs fire." As the music rose and cheers echoed, someone wheeled out a cake shaped like a gavel. Someone else played a vinyl record of Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come." But the moment Carlton would remember most happened hours later, when the crowd had thinned and the stars shone sharp overhead. A young white man approached him, hesitating. "Mr. Mays?" he said. Carlton turned. "Yes." The man extended a trembling hand. "My father was Judge Halberd." Carlton looked at him carefully. The man's suit was neat, but his eyes were clouded. "I wanted to hate you," he said. "But then I read the transcript. Watch the hearings. I realized you didn't destroy my father. You just showed us who he really was." Carlton said nothing. "I'm sorry," the man whispered, "for what he said, for what he did, for all the years we didn't see you." Carlton took his hand, then started seeing others. Months passed. Sheila Harris took the bench, and with her came small changes that echoed big ones. Expanded diversion programs, youth mentorship initiatives, open office hours for community questions. She invited Carlton to every swearing-in of new court clerks and interns. Luis was accepted into a political science program on full scholarship. Carlton retired officially. He didn't clean floors anymore, but he cleaned minds speaking at schools, town halls, veterans groups. Not with anger, but with clarity. One day, a journalist from a national paper asked him during a live interview, "Mr. Mays, do you consider yourself a symbol of justice?" Carlton laughed gently. "I ain't no symbol. I'm just a man who showed up." "But your story has changed lives," the reporter pressed. "Don't you feel vindicated?" Carlton looked into the camera, eyes steady. "Justice isn't about making someone pay. It's about making things right. I never wanted a seat. I just wanted folks to stand." And across Missouri, and slowly, the country people did. They stood in classrooms to teach the full story. They stood in courtrooms to challenge the broken rules. They stood in grocery stores, in city council meetings, in churches recognizing the Carltons around them. Finally seeing, finally listening, because one man had rolled into a courtroom and refused to stay silent. And in doing so, he didn't just change a town. He reminded a nation. Spring bloomed gently over Jefferson County, as if the land itself had exhaled. Where tension once lingered like smoke, conversations now took root, not always easy, not always kind, but honest. Carlton Mays had become a name people spoke with reverence. But more importantly, he'd become a name they carried. In April, Sheila Harris proposed a program named Voices from the Bench, a series of community events where individuals affected by the justice system could speak directly to those who shaped it: judges, attorneys, policymakers. Carlton, naturally, was the first guest speaker. He rolled to the podium that night beneath the same rotunda Judge Halberd once presided over. The crowd stood the moment he entered. He waved them down with a smile. "I didn't come here to give a speech," he began. "I came to listen, because you can't clean what you don't first see." The stories that followed were raw. A mother who'd lost custody over a single missed hearing. A veteran denied housing due to a minor offense 2 decades old. A college student suspended for protesting peacefully during a racial justice rally. Carlton didn't speak again that night. He simply sat and listened, letting their truths settle in his bones. When it ended, he rolled to each speaker one by one and said the same 4 words: "Your story matters now." Later that week, Luis convinced him to join a podcast interview. "I'm no radio man," Carlton grumbled, chuckling. "You're not," Luis agreed, "but you're the voice we need." The podcast, Second Gavel, featured Carlton's full account of that day, in court, not just the insult, but the ripple it caused. It went viral within days, downloaded across all 50 states and overseas military bases. Emails poured in from black janitors in Florida, from indigenous veterans in Montana, from young activists in London. One message came from a high school teacher in Arkansas. "I played your episode for my students." One boy stayed after class crying. Said for the first time, he felt seen. Another arrived from a judge in Oregon. "Your testimony made me rethink how I run my courtroom. Thank you for shaking me awake." Carlton printed each one, not to frame, but to remember, because memory, he always said, is what keeps justice honest. But time, too, is undefeated. That summer, Carlton's health began to falter. The long years in the chair, the decades of war injuries, and the nights spent working without complaint began to catch up to him. Still, he refused to slow down. He attended every Voices from the Bench event. He mentored Luis like a son. He wrote letters to editors, showed up at city council meetings, even taught civic responsibility at the local high school. His body weakened, but his purpose sharpened. One evening, while resting in his modest living room, surrounded by old war photos and drawings Luis had made, Carlton turned to his granddaughter Ava. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "when I'm gone, don't mourn me. March for me, and take someone with you." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Promise me," he whispered. "I promise, Grandpa." Carlton Mays passed away on a Wednesday morning in September, peacefully in his sleep, the morning light just beginning to cut through the blinds. A folded American flag rested above his bed. On his nightstand was a photo of his platoon. Beneath it, the word brothers scribbled in his handwriting. The news hit the town like thunder, not with panic, but with reverence. Flags were lowered. The courthouse closed early. The mayor declared a week of mourning. The governor issued a formal statement of honor. But it was the people's response that mattered most. Luis organized a candlelight march. Over 2,000 people attended, black, white, brown, immigrant, native, rich, poor, all walking silently down Main Street, holding candles and signs that read. He spoke. We listened. Carlton Mays still standing. Justice rolls forward. At the head of the march was Carlton's empty wheelchair, pushed gently by Ava and Luis side by side. Later that night, the county held a memorial service in the same courtroom where the judge once called him boy. But now, Carlton's portrait hung on the wall behind the bench, facing the chamber like a sentinel. Sheila Harris delivered the eulogy. "I don't stand here as a judge tonight," she said, voice trembling. "I stand here as one of many people Carlton lifted. He never asked for recognition. He never demanded a title. He just showed up again and again when others looked away. Some changed the world with wealth or war. Carlton changed it by refusing to be silent." She looked up at his portrait, her hand on the bench. "I will not let this seat forget him." Then, she reached in her robe and placed a folded piece of paper on the bench. It was the notebook Luis had once given Carlton, the one that said "Stand tall." It stayed there. Every day, 2 years passed. The courthouse bustled with new energy. More diverse clerks, community volunteers, open forums, internships named after Carlton for students from underserved communities. Luis graduated with honors and announced he'd be running for city council. His slogan? "I learned from Mays." Sheila Harris was now being considered for the state Supreme Court. Every time asked about her greatest influence, she answered the same. "Carlton Mays taught me what a real judge looks like." Even national policy had begun to shift. One bill in particular, the Mays Justice Act, proposed federal funding for local judicial transparency and community input boards. It passed with bipartisan support, with senators reading Carlton's words into the congressional record. And in homes, schools, and churches far beyond Missouri, his story became legend. Not just for what he endured, but for how he responded. Not with hate, Not with revenge, with truth. 10 years later, on what would have been Carlton's 91st birthday, Ava stood before a new crowd, this time at a public square newly renamed Carlton Mays Civic Plaza. Children played near fountains engraved with his quotes. Elders sat beneath shade trees planted in his honor. Behind the stage, a statue stood, not of a man in uniform, not of a warrior, but of a janitor in a wheelchair, head high, eyes forward, holding a mop in one hand and a folded flag in the other. Ava looked out at the crowd and saw faces of every kind. "You might think he was a man of contradiction," she said. "A man who went to war, then came home to mop floors. A man who held medals but was treated like trash. But my grandfather wasn't a contradiction. He was a mirror. He showed us who we are and who we could be." She paused, her voice thick with memory. "When someone tells you you're small or broken or unworthy, you remember this. My grandpa was told he was nothing, and then he changed everything." The crowd erupted into applause. Ava turned toward the statue, touched its bronze shoulder, and whispered, "Still standing, Grandpa, just like you said." And the wind picked up gently through the plaza, carrying her words forward past the courthouse, down the avenues, across the state toward every boy who'd been silenced, every veteran forgotten, every janitor overlooked, every courtroom waiting to be rewritten. Because Carlton Mays had rolled through injustice and never stopped moving. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.